Good evening and welcome to this third episode of News 24's Editor's Table. My name is Adrian Dasson. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of News 24, and it's my absolute privilege to welcome you in my house. This is my house. This is my working table. I've been working from home for, it's almost a year. It's longer than a year now. News 24 moved to a working from home regime last year when lockdown struck, and here we are still. But tonight we're not talking about lockdown. We're talking about a much more exciting story. And you would have seen from the invitation and the headline that our theme for tonight is Judge John Hlophe, Judge President of the Western Cape. Is he above the law? We will try to answer that question tonight. I'm joined by my fantastic colleagues who have not slept a lot this week because they've been sitting through hearings at the Judicial Service Commission, and we'll hear from them in a moment exactly what is that beast called the JSC and why is it important and why does it exist. Good evening, Karen Morn.
Hello.
Senior legal reporter for News 24, specialist legal writer for News 24 rather, and Jeanette Shabalala. Hello, Jeanette.
Hi, hello.
Jeanette is our senior court reporter also at News 24 in Johannesburg. My colleagues Jeanette and Karen, as I mentioned, sat through the hearings of the Judicial Service Commission this week, where the ghost of John Hlophe, may I say, was looming large over proceedings. He wasn't there. He wasn't, being interviewed for any position, but his issue was omnipresent. What he's up to and what's happening to him. So, Karen, I want to ask you to kick off for us. You guys sat through the JSC hearings this week where the commission were interviewing judges for vacancies on the Constitutional Court bench, on the Supreme Court of Appeal bench. The judiciary is a very important pillar of our democracy. Of course, it's one of the three pillars on which our democracy rests. And the trust in our judiciary is of utmost importance for the rule of law to reign supreme. How should South Africans feel about the state of their judiciary after this week?
Well, I think there are two parallel issues here. First of all, a very serious finding of gross misconduct has been made against John Hlophe. And the JSC has effectively come out and said, well, we don't regard this as particularly urgent. There's nothing special about this matter. And we will handle it just like any other case, of which we know just one other, which of course was the drunk judge and Kula Matata matter that the JSC dealt with. So that is concerning. But in parallel to that, we had, the JSC is a politicized entity. It always has been, because you have the politicians present as representatives of parliament in that process. But this week, I think it descended into a realm that was deeply unfortunate, with the Chief Justice making politically explosive comments about Pravin Gordhan's question to him about how Daya Pillay had fared in 2016, 2016 application for an SCA position, which of course imploded. We now see the EFF saying they want to lay criminal charges. But also the way in which Daya Pillay was treated in that forum, being accused of being unfit to be a judge, a political activist by Malema, with zero intervention by anyone in that forum. And the judges who have arguably made, controversial or courageous decisions in the course of their rulings, all excluded. Aubrey Ledwaba, who of course made the spy tapes decision in relation to Zuma, who has been the deputy judge president of Pretoria for quite some time, has taken on a number of politically explosive cases, sidelined for the SCA. And also Owen Rogers, who is currently, enmeshed in this Hlophe saga, albeit tangentially because of his complaint against Mushtaq Parker and his ongoing dispute with Hlophe's lawyer, Kulu, also being excluded. And then, of course, the question marks over the decision not to nominate David Unterhalter, who's one of the finest legal minds in this country, for a position at the Constitutional Court, obviously indicating that this has fundamentally become a politicized process. And I think raising concerns in the minds of any South African about the body that's meant to appoint judges, find the best judges for the job, and B, discipline them when they are proven to have gone outside the bounds of what is expected of a judicial officer.
Karen, you've sat through many of these JSC interview processes over the years as a legal writer. Has this been the worst experience? Is this a low point?
Yes, absolutely it is.
Okay, that's a clear answer. South Africans should not sleep that well tonight. Jeanette, you were also at these hearings. Just tell us a bit more about how this works. I mean, you guys were at a hotel. Are journalists allowed to sit in, or, you know, when are you chased out? When must you sit outside? How does the JSC work? How is it made up, and why is it there?
Okay, so the JSC is made up of politicians, judges, lawyers, attorneys and advocates. And obviously it's chaired by the Chief Justice Mogoeng. So how it's made up is that it performs an advisory role to the president in relation to matters involving the judiciary. So what happens is that if there's a vacancy, then they advertise it, they call nominees, and they shortlist candidates. And that's what we've seen this week, interviewing judges and everything. And like Karen just mentioned now, it has been amazing. I feel like it has been amazing because it actually, sitting there, you actually see what's actually happening in the judiciary, in all the courts, what's happening with this judge, how judges treat other judges. Case in point, the SCA top 6, that was a shocker. To actually hear that there's a top 6 at at the appeal court, treating junior judges like they are basically not nothing, so to say, you know what I mean? So, and then it's really problematic that when those things are mentioned before the JSC, we as the journalists, we are accused of actually not reporting on the JSC. I mean, all these allegations that are being leveled against certain people, we are accused of not reporting on them. This is what Mogoeng said, that they are not enjoying, the top 6 meta is not enjoying the same scrutiny as some of the judges are enjoying, like Hlophe. Hlophe has been reported on so many times. But the thing is, they don't want to actually say who exactly is the top 6. How are we going to report on something that they really don't want to tell us? Who exactly is the top 6? Who exactly is treating certain judges in a manner that is not deemed fit? You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Jeanette, it sounds to me like a lot of what happened at the JSC this week was not about the skills and competencies and experience of the candidates, but about other issues, about top 6s and cases in which these judges sat. And I heard the term judicial dictatorship quite a lot, as if that was a fact put to a lot of the judges in question. Jeanette, I think I also want to explore with you the importance of trust in the judiciary. The importance in a country that says the rule of law reigns supreme, where judges are seen at the top, right? As seen as at the top of that ladder, so to speak. Are you concerned that that is being eroded by happenings in front of the JSC this week, but then specifically by the handling or the non-handling of the Hlophe matter for the past 13 years by the Judicial Service Commission?
Adrian, the JSC normally takes forever to handle cases. I mean, the Hlophe one, 13 years. Imagine someone in Limpopo or KZN when they read that the JSC is taking forever to actually arrive at a decision. What is at hand here is that the JSC doesn't really want to, what is this? They don't want to actually keep each other to account. Accountable. They don't like doing that. And I remember the Chief Justice once said that the judiciary never shies away from handling whoever judge that might be found to be guilty of anything, or if a complaint comes before them, then they will handle it. But 13 years, really, I mean, the Hlophe case is very complex. Karen, you remember we were talking about it. It's very, there was so many litigations. And even for me as a journalist, I wonder sometimes, what's happening here? So it's very complex, the Hlophe matter. So just bear with us. I just want to tell everyone that bear with journalists sometimes, because we are trying so hard to actually unpack certain things so that you guys out there, you understand what's happening.
Karen, let's turn our attention to the man of the moment, the man of this webinar, not Chief Justice, not yet, hopefully not, the Western Cape Judge President John Hlophe. And before we dig into his, scandals of the past, how many years, let's just kind of, cast our eye back to 21 years ago when he was appointed as, I think, the youngest judge president of all time in the Western Cape. He was very young when he was appointed a judge to the Cape, what was then called the Cape Provincial Division. Just take us back to those years.
Well, Hlophe was regarded, President Hlophe was regarded as somewhat of a legal protege. I mean, he, was educated at Cambridge and was actually an academic at the time that he was recruited to the bench at the age of 36. And he was the first Black judge to go to the Western Cape High Court. So it was seen as quite a significant and momentous event. 5 years later, in 2000, he gets appointed as the judge president. Correctly, you say the youngest in South African history, literally our age when he assumes that top position. And he's regarded as, spoken about as a future Chief Justice because of his kind of academic grasp. He had never practiced as a lawyer. He'd gone straight into academics, but he was regarded as someone who, because of the insight that he bore and because of his, profound grasp of legal issues, had all the potential to become one of South Africa's most lauded and respected judicial figures. You muted.
Where did it go wrong? Where did it go wrong, Karen? When was that moment when you, as a legal journalist, I think you were still in Cape Town at that point, realized, oh my goodness, here comes something? I think you wrote a brilliant piece recently on News 24 in which you tracked his controversies over the years, and you had to limit yourself to 10, but I think there were many more. But I mean, I think if I remember your piece well, the New Clicks judgment in 2004 was really the first time that he got into the headlines for the wrong reasons.
Well, the New Clicks matter happened in 2004, and it was really illustrative of a pathology that would display itself throughout his career, which was a kind of, I don't want to use the word, but pettiness. And the kind of use of his power to make life difficult for those that he is regarded as adversaries. Now, in New Clicks in 2004, there had been a government implementation of pricing regulations around medications that was challenged by a number of pharmaceutical companies. John Hlophe, JP Hlophe and James Ikiso dismissed a challenge by those companies against the then Minister of Health, Mantsha Shabalala and Samang. Because the matter was urgent, they sought an urgent leave to appeal, which John Hlophe basically ignored for 5 weeks, prompting them to take the extraordinary step at the time, and it was headline grabbing, to basically petition the Supreme Court of Appeal for leave outside of him having made a decision. And a few days, I think, after they had argued that case in the SCA, JP Hlophe then dismissed the application by New Clicks for leave to appeal. His decision was overturned by the SCA, with Louis Hammerams raising huge issues about the delay, saying, effectively you've denied, these litigants justice because they should be timeously allowed to appeal. And then round about the same time frame, the JP releases this so-called racism report, 43 pages, in which he names the senior counsel in that case who was arguing for New Clicks, Jeremy Gauntlet, who we all well know, as a racist, leading to a distinct suspicion that perhaps his conduct in relation to refusing to allow them to argue their case for leave to appeal was driven very, very potentially by his personal issues with that advocate.
Did that report ever lead to anything?
No, the JSC said that, you know, the people named in it, who included his deputy, Jeanette Traversa, of course, she was the person who wrote the minority judgment in New Clicks, which was upheld by the court, and that they had fundamentally refuted the allegations against them, and it never went anywhere. But as I'm sure Jeanette will raise when she speaks about, you know, the Nkabinde Jafta Constitutional Court matter, when the judge president was accused by the Constitutional Court of trying to influence them in relation to a case involving then ANC President Jacob Zuma, he used the New Clicks, he used the racism report as a basis to say this whole thing, these complaints are informed by nefarious political motives that is driven by racism. And, you know, I was lauded as this potential star of the judiciary. And because of that, because of this racist agenda, I am now being targeted because I wrote that racism report. And that is why, you know, all these judges are going against me. And of course, in amongst those that had actually brought the complaint forward were the late Pius Langa and Deputy Chief Justice Dekang Moseneke, not only extraordinarily gifted judges, but, you know, anti-apartheid luminaries in their own right.
Karen, we'll get back to that, because I'm sure that racism report is going to resurface very soon when JP Hlophe responds to the tribunal report by Judge Labishkachny and his panel. But let's quickly remind our viewers of the case involving an attorney called Joshua Hlophe. And before we go there, I just want to remind all our viewers tonight, all our News 24 subscribers who so kindly joined us for this discussion, you can ask us questions. I'm going to take your questions towards the end of this panel. There's a button on your screen that says Q&A. Please use that to write questions. I see some of you have already started. Thank you very much. We will get to them in due course. But Karen, remind us of the case of one Joshua Hlophe. What happened there?
So in 2005, Joshua Hlophe had been representing a man called Mohammed Isaacs, who was found guilty of the murder of Sasha Lee Crook. It was a big case at the time. She was a little 8-year-old girl. He was her neighbor. She'd been raped and murdered. Hlophe went on the radio and made certain comments in relation to the acting judge, Thandiswa Ndita, who was handling that matter, which profoundly upset her. And she then complained to JP Hlophe, held a meeting in his chambers, during which he allegedly or reportedly told Hlophe that, I'm not sure if I can swear on this forum.
No, you're welcome. Go ahead.
He was a piece of white shit and he should go back to Holland. And Hlophe did not choose to pursue a complaint in relation to it, but the same time period during which Norman Arendse, who's also a counsel at the bar, alleged that the JP had told him that he'd assigned a certain case involving the education department in Afrikaans medium school to Judge Wolfring. Again, I'm sorry for anyone who's sensitive to swearing, because he knew he would quote unquote fuck it up. And, you know, that was also later subjected to a JSC investigation. Nothing came of those. But yeah, it was interesting seeing in the Patricia Goliath matter, which is now occurring, that one of the allegations that she made against him was that he called her a piece of shit. She, of course, had a recording of it. But there seemed to be a kind of level of evidence around this kind of language and this kind of conduct of alleged abusiveness.
And then, Jeanette, on an autumn day in March 2008, the Western Cape Judge President traveled right up to Braamfontein, when the Constitutional Court is situated, to go and have tea with Judges Bess Nkabinde and Chris Jafta, right?
Yeah, well, he had tea with Jafta first in March, and then later in April, then, you know, he met up with Justice Bess Nkabinde. So what happened in March was that, what's his name, Hlophe went to Justice Jafta, who was acting at the time. He was a judge in the Supreme Court of Appeal, then he was acting at the Constitutional Court at the time, and he was handling the Zuma matter. So what he said was that they discussed it. He said, you know, the matter needs to be handled properly, meaning we putting our hopes on you. And then later, in April, that's when he called Justice Blessing Tabinde, and then, about meeting up with her, she agreed. And then when they met, they discussed the same thing. And then she felt like he was trying to influence her. Then this is when she told retired Judge Mokgoro about the whole matter. And then Judge Mokgoro was like, you know what, let's inform the Chief Justice at the time, Justice Langa, and then they also informed Moseneke. Because they are, like you said, Karen, they are very knowledgeable, they're very, good people in the justice fraternity, then they were like, you know what, we don't want the judiciary to be in disrepute. We have to report this. They sent the complaint to the JSC, which took forever, because in 2009, the JSC decided that, you know what, they dismissed the matter because they couldn't find anything. They couldn't find that it warranted a gross misconduct charge. So when they dismissed it, thanks to people like, Helen Ziller, at the time she was Premier of the Western Cape, she took the matter to court. Let's not forget freedom under law as well. They took the matter to court, and this is why we are here today. And then now on Saturday, the tribunal report found that Hlophe is, they found Hlophe guilty of gross misconduct. So it's impeachable. So, but now, we can't do anything now until the JSC decides on the matter. So what the JSC has to decide on, if it accepts the findings of the tribunal, then that means Hlophe, who has been vocal about it. I mean, even this week, his lawyer released a statement saying that they acknowledge that the tribunal released the report, but they don't agree with the report, they don't agree with the report because it lacks evidence, something like that. It lacks evidence. And they also said that the tribunal endorses the views of freedom under law, the partisan views of freedom under law. So we expect him, if the JSC, of course, accepts what the tribunal found, we expect Hlophe to actually fight this till the end. He might take it to the High Court. And then from the High Court, if he loses, the Supreme Court of Appeal, then the Constitutional Court. We're looking at 5 years more. And I know that a lot of people are calling for his suspension now. They want his head now, but no, be patient, because they quick justice.
I want to talk about the suspension process and how that could happen, because my understanding is President Cyril Ramaphosa must actually suspend him. Karen, I just want to quickly take you back to 2008 and what Hlophe actually did, because I think we shouldn't, go too quick about the gravity of what he did there. So just explain maybe to our viewers, how does the writing of a judgment work at the Constitutional Court? There's a bench of judges, they hear the matter, what happens then, and why is it so deeply problematic what he did?
Well, in the first instance, Justice Chris Jafta was his friend. So, he'd gone to Jafta and sort of made these comments about the issue of privilege in Zuma's case. Now, just to backtrack, essentially what had happened was Jacob Zuma was attempting to challenge, or had been involved in a series of challenges to the Scorpions, the then Scorpions search and seizure warrants used by the DSO to seize 93,000 pages of documentation that are now forming the basis of the forensic report that will be utilized against Zuma if and when he goes on trial in May. So it was a pivotal legal challenge, because if Jacob Zuma was successful in getting those documents knocked out, a substantive part of the state's case against him would have been damaged. So that's point number one. Jacob Zuma had been somewhat successful in his legal challenges to those warrants in the lower courts, but they were then brought to the Supreme Court of Appeal, where in a 3-2 split, the court actually found that they should stand. But one of the pivotal issues that divided this court was the issue of privilege, because in amongst these mountains of documents that were seized were 2 boxes of financial records that were taken from the offices of Zuma's then lawyer, lawyer Michael Hulley. So when John Hlophe went to JAFTA and said this issue of privilege needed to be decided correctly, it wasn't an innocent legal debate. This was literally at the heart, the most potentially successful aspect of Zuma's appeal, and it would have had deep and profound implications for the NPA. Fine, he meets with JAFTA. JAFTA doesn't initially think that there's anything wrong, but when he hears from Nkabinde that out of the blue, John Hlophe, who she doesn't know, she has no relationship with him, she is the judge who is writing the note on privilege. So she is going to be the person that provides the legal thinking about whether this argument stands. He then contacts her and says that I have a mandate to speak to you. And makes a number of utterances, including that I have a list from intelligence with names of people who have benefited from the arms deal who will potentially lose their jobs when Jacob Zuma becomes president. So when the tribunal evaluated her evidence, they said that he was clearly, and he also spoke about ministers telling him that they were concerned that the justices of the Constitutional Court do not understand our history. So the tribunal felt that that was an attempt by him to politically brag about his connections, his political connections, and also to give her a kind of subtle threat of, you know, this potential looming change of administration. Remember, this is in 2008. 2009, you know, he'd already been elected in the 2007 conference as ANC president. So he was someone who was very, very likely to be president of the country, and subsequently we know he became it. He then tries to broach this issue with privilege with her, and she says, listen, my brother, she says, no, my brother, like, I can't speak to you about this. It's not proper for you to do this. I'm paraphrasing. And he said, no, he doesn't want to, you know, he's not, you know, he apologizes, but he says to her, there is no case against Jacob Zuma. And he also told her and Chris Jafta that Zuma is being persecuted just as he is being persecuted. So he linked his judicial fate very much to that of Jacob Zuma. And the tribunal ultimately finding, I mean, he sought to present that as this is an innocent thing. We do this all the time. Judges talk. And the tribunal rejected it. It said, no, if a judge asks another judge for a legal opinion or insight on a specific issue, that is one thing. John Hlophe is not an expert on privilege. He's never written a judgment on privilege, number one. Number two, these judges did not solicit his advice on this issue. And number three, the tribunal said, his comments about there's no case against Jacob Zuma traversed the line between a debate around principle and the actual facts of that case. And that was radically inappropriate. The tribunal saying that they were basically completely surprised by the fact that he would not know that as a judge, you are not supposed to decide or discuss a pending case with your with judges in another division. It simply isn't done. And
Aaron,
he's not doing that.
There's of course another link between John Hlophe and Jacob Zuma, and that's the guy by the name of Barnabas Kulu, who is John Hlophe's lawyer and attorney, and if you remember well, was the, I think, convener or leader or founder of chairperson of an organization called the Friends of Jacob Zuma that I remember very well when I covered the Zuma trial in 2005 in Durban. Barnabas Kulu was one of the people with others running around raising money for Jacob Zuma, who was then just sacked as deputy president by Thabo Mbeki. And Barnabas Kulu was this, at that point, relatively unknown lawyer from Cape Town who was raising funds for Jacob Zuma. But I mean, Kulu has been omnipresent in Hlophe's career as lawyer and as litigant, right?
Correct. So there's a few issues here. First of all, when Hlophe began experiencing his legal difficulties with the Constitutional Court, the DG of Justice in the Zuma administration at the time actually okayed him getting unconditional legal funding, which of course has massively benefited Barnabas Kulu. Second of all, there was a very, a scathing judgment given, I think, in about 2017 against against a man called Malawutsi in relation to, which effectively a very strident criticism of John Hlophe's conduct in a specific case, where the NPA had seized the assets of someone who was implicated in a 42 million rand fraud involving Old Mutual. And that order was reversed by Judge Hlophe And the man Mulaudzi was represented by Barnabas Kulu, and Hlophe reversed the preservation order, essentially allowing these assets to be released back into the hands of the accused, very evidently on the judgment that was delivered in the SCA, without even reading the NPA's response to his attacks on its case against him. And I think it was Judge Ponin at the time, having a great deal of scathing criticism for the JP, saying that it's just simply unseemly for someone in his position to grant such an order to someone who is his personal attorney. The perception of bias in that particular matter cannot be unchecked. And of course, the counsel for the state in that case was Hermione Cronje, who is now the head of the investigating directorate. Subsequent to that, we see in, I think it was in 2018, him granting an order for Barnabas Kulu to be the repatriation agent for the NPA for 100 million rand legal settlement that was paid out of the United States in the Bengus case, which was this big rock lobster case that has been dragging on for years in America and here. And she's Barbara Creasy, who is the Minister of Environmental Affairs, Forestry and Fisheries, fundamentally raising questions about the way in which that order was granted. It was granted in a matter that concerned the department, because obviously this rocks lobster issue was linked to their work. And just saying, it was extraordinary to her that she had severe misgivings about what exactly had happened. So clearly the Mulaudzi judgment, which was so scathing of the JP, did not deter him from doing exactly the same thing a few years later.
Jeanette, all of this has...
Oh, sorry, Adrienne. On the complaint as well, I just want to add something, because there's something that Hlophe said about Justice Langa and Moseneke at the time, accusing them of distorting information and then accusing them as well of trying to get rid of him by all means possible. Yeah. So I feel like that just opened up, the judiciary for attacks, because what we're seeing now, the Zondo Commission, hearing about judges, people attempting to bribe judges, hearing political parties as well, trying to, just saying that judges are corrupt. So I just feel like it started there, actually. He opened the judiciary up for public attacks.
That's very interesting point. Jeanette, I want to ask you about the impact of this entire Hlophe matter on the judiciary. I mean, how has this matter impacted not only the view of the public and public perceptions about the judiciary, and we'll get to your questions now, the viewers' questions now, because there's some very pointed questions on this in this regard. But how has it impacted the judiciary, the functioning of the judiciary, the way judges interact with each other? Karen has told us that it's normal for judges to ask each other for advice on points of law that they are deemed as experts. But I guess after this, people are thinking twice about this kind of thing.
Yeah, and also just to say that judges are supposed to be communicating via their judgments and not making headlines. When you see a judge making headlines, then you should know that something is wrong in the judiciary. Judges are supposed to be speaking through their judgments and nothing else. So it has impacted the judiciary in a sense that most of the people that I've spoken to, they don't really trust the courts, especially the judges that are being talked about. They don't trust. And then now we can see that during the Pillay interview, Twitter was abuzz, just talking about her and her friendship with Minister of Public Enterprises. It's as if whatever she says, whatever case she deals with, nobody's going to trust whatever she does. And even if her case is, even if she rules on something very important, and people are not going to trust it because of the noise that we are hearing out there, So, yeah.
And that makes your role so important, Jeanette, to tell us what is the truth and what is just noise. And there's a nice word that starts with a B that is almost the same as nonsense. Karen, I want you to wrap up our session before we go to the questions. Just looking forward for this matter, we now have a very strong, after 13 years, judgment against John Hlophe. He refuses to vacate his seat. He's not going anywhere soon out of his own volition. What happens next? How long could this process drag? And why did it take so long to get here?
Well, essentially in 2009, the problem was that the JSC dismissed the complaint of the Constitutional Court against John Hlophe, and the SCA was very scathing in its evaluation of that decision, because basically they did so without any form of cross-examination. They dismissed it at the stage of a sort of preliminary inquiry, and they didn't really engage with the disputes that existed between those various judges over what had happened. Subsequent to the court's overturning, the decision to dismiss the case right at the beginning, there was a series of litigation, not all of which John Hlophe was responsible for. We know, of course, Bessen Kabinde and Chris Jafta brought their own challenges to the matter, because the JSC Act shifted. So the way in which these kind of disciplinary scenarios happen also became different, and they felt that they wanted the process to occur under the terms of the previous, the way in which it was previously legally structured, which the Supreme Court of Appeal ultimately and the High Court dismissed. Then there were disputes over the payment of John Hlophe's fees. That went on for something like 2 years. There was a challenge by JP Hlophe to Kagni Musi being the judge that would be presiding over his tribunal. So he recused himself because he said he wasn't prepared to, while he disputed Hlophe's accusations that he'd made, unflattering remarks about him at a social event, he wasn't going to delay the process with a whole potential other arm of litigation. And then, so there were subsequent events that occurred, but over a 2-year period from, about the Kagni Musi, recusal issue, simply nothing happened. And when I inquired about it, I was told, no, it was because of a legal fees dispute. So, one can understand that there has been litigation attempt, connected to this, but there has been a profound and notable absence of political will from the JSC to actually get this resolved. And, it continues to cast a very dark, shadow over the judiciary. And it gives South Africans a rightful reason to believe that judges are very willing to judge everyone else, but they're not prepared to do it to themselves.
On that somber note, I want to go to our questions from our panelists. So let me quickly open them here right in front of me. And let's start with this one. Where a reader is asking if you think our judiciary is captured. Mary, thank you, Mary, for that question. Karen, do you believe our judiciary is captured?
No, I don't think it is. I think that, our judiciary is robust, and there are a number of very, I would say, courageous judges who make unpopular decisions, despite the fact that they are then subjected to huge levels of often quite vocal and potentially violent abuse. I know of judges who have personally told me of how they have been threatened, their lives have been threatened. So, we have a political environment now where our former president, amongst other people, and the leader of the EFF are very happy to make allegations of judicial capture, to say people like Aubrey Ledwaba sealed the CR17 records with a nefarious purpose, knowing full well that there's simply no evidence of that whatsoever. And I think it's very unfortunate that people in positions of power, including Julius Malema, have actively perpetuated this, this allegation of corruption against judges without having any semblance of evidence. What does complicate matters, of course, as Jeanette has pointed out, is the evidence that emerged in the state capture inquiry of SSA payments to judges during the Zuma administration. If those things are not properly investigated, they are going to continue to have a shadow over all of us, just as the kind of allegations of journalists being paid. If those journalists aren't named and they aren't properly identified, it casts, as we all know, a shadow over all of us. So my personal experience has been that judges are, people will make rulings that are overturned on appeal. We have appeal structures that effectively deal with that. But have I encountered ever a judgment where I thought manifestly this is a consequence of corruption, or this is not based and rooted in the Constitution and the law? Honestly, I can't say so. Even
the acquittal of Bongani Bongo?
Well, you want to get me nailed for contempt, Adrian? No.
I had to go there. Jeanette, a question from reader or viewer rather, Lorden Tobani. Julius Malema himself is implicated in a tender scam, corruption allegations. How is he on the JSC? Or are there not any laws to exclude someone like him from serving as a commissioner of the JSC? Can you help us with that?
He hasn't been found guilty of anything, right? And nobody has laid a complaint with the JSC. So unless someone lays a complaint and says Julius Malema should recuse himself or whatever, he should not be part of the JSC, then we can't really be saying why is he part of the JSC. Lay a complaint and then say he was accused of corruption. But yeah, he hasn't been found guilty of anything. Yeah?
Jeanette, there was this week some attempt, right? It's the first time I saw this by KSAC to write to Parliament to ask whether Parliament agrees with his views on the judiciary, but obviously it didn't happen in a way that got him removed from the hearings.
Yeah, okay. I was aware of that, but yeah, if anyone really lays a complaint with the JSC, then maybe they might take him out.
Karen, do you have a view on that?
I don't think the corruption stuff is as pivotal, for example, as the kind of statements that he's made about the judiciary. So he went and supported in Parliament, which is obviously an enshrined legal body, and he's able to say what he wants there. He did say, that there was undisputable evidence that judges had been bribed by the CR17 campaign. During the JSC hearings, he suggested that Aubrey de Dwaba was to blame for those kind of allegations because he'd made the determination to seal the records, which, I think is akin to a form of victim blaming. But I know that KSAC has written to the National Assembly because Julius Malema is there in the JSC as a representative of Parliament, and asked them specifically if his views on judges being corrupt and his attacks on, he made utterances about 2 female judges being, manipulated by political leaders at one stage. He's made a number of different attacks on the judiciary. He was very vocal in his attacks of Daya Pillay as being allegedly unfit. There was, in terms of that, the National Assembly has come out and said, look, he doesn't represent our views on the judiciary. And if you wish to take this further, you must make a complaint. And as far as I know, KSAC is pursuing that particular process, and we'll have to see how successful it is and the kind of overt pushback that I suspect there will be in relation to their case that he shouldn't be there.
Karen, I want you to answer Sabelo and Kumalu. Thank you, Sabelo, for your question. The question is, listening to the interviews and allegations, i.e. the top 6 in the SCA, I got a feeling that the South African judiciary still mirrors elements of the apartheid glorified old boys club. And I'm really scared for the future of the country. Why has a constitutional democracy allowed this to manifest in our courts?
Well, I have the utmost respect for the president of the JSC, of the SCA, Mandisa Maya. She is an incredible judge. And what happened with the top 6 allegations? Those emerged in April 2019 because there were revelations in the JSC that a female acting judge had been treated in an incredibly disrespectful manner by a senior colleague. I think that Zinat Carlse has come forward and said that was in fact her. She's now been nominated, or she will be appointed to the SCA. But Mandisa Maya grabbed the bull by the horns in that situation and showed definitive leadership. She had sensitivity training. The judges who were seen as being part of this top 6, as Jeanette points out, they haven't been named, were confronted by their colleagues about their conduct. And all the judges who were interviewed, including those that acknowledged that there had been mistreatment, said that under Maya's leadership, a Black woman judge, a seminal leader, that atmosphere had been transformed because of what she had done. So, there is clearly the shadow of this thing hanging, but even Judge Petse, who's the DJP of that court, said, look, we have dealt with this, and there's now a new top 6 in which he and Maya are at the helm of that organization. So there clearly had been issues, but whether or not that's the judge, all the judges interviewed fundamentally denied that that was the state of play at the moment. And I have massive respect for Judge Maya. She's spoken about that whole transformation process. She's spoken about how difficult it was. And I think she's demonstrated ample leadership in dealing with it. And to suggest that, you know, she's not able to transform the bench with what she's done, I think is fundamentally quite condescending towards her.
Karen, just the last question to you before we open up to a special guest, I want to say, that's going to join us on this panel tonight. There's a question from anonymous attendee. Thank you, Anonymous, for your question. Whether the president can decline the JSC's recommendations and send them back to re-interview candidates. Look,
it's never happened, but I'm not entirely sure that it's not possible. You know, in the normal course of events, so with the Constitutional Court, the president is, you know, given a certain shortlist that he can choose from. In all other matters, he is, you know, the JSC essentially appoints and then he almost rubber stamps it. But we haven't ever seen a situation where the president has refused to appoint based on the recommendations of the JSC. If it does happen, it will obviously be an indication that he doesn't regard the JSC as having properly fulfilled its function, and that will, of course, precipitate a quite significant legal crisis, potentially.
Karen, Jeanette, thank you very much. Viewers, we are privileged to have with us tonight one of the eminent legal minds in South Africa and someone whose name comes up a lot in the Hlophe matter, retired Judge Johann Kriegler. Judge Kriegler, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It is an honor and a privilege to have you on News 24.
Hello, Adrian. Hello to everybody else. For me, it's a privilege to be with you, and I've enjoyed listening up to now.
Judge Kriegler, if one is to believe the attorney of Judge President John Hlophe, Mr. Barnabas Kulu, you are the sole reason we are here tonight. It's because of you that the JP is facing all these troubles. What is your reaction to that?
If only that were true. Certainly, freedom under law, my guidance with freedom under law has played a role, yes. We did bring some pressure to bear at a time, but the law has ground slowly. The mill has turned over. Please God, it will finish off the job soon.
Judge, if I listen to my very smart colleagues, Jeanette and Karen, it may not be over very soon. There's still the option of an appeal. And if I listen to the JSC spokesperson, Advocate Dalium Mpofu this week, there doesn't seem to be a haste in dealing with this matter. What is your reaction to what you heard this week from the JSC, and what will you do next?
Adrian, far from there not being a haste to do anything, it seems as if there's a haste to do nothing. Mr. Mpofu, barefaced, can tell journalists that Judge Hlophe will be dealt with like all the other judges. That's untrue. The two judges against whom there are disciplinary proceedings pending, Judges Makubela and Parker, have been suspended on the advice of the Judicial Service Commission. We have pressed for Judge Hlophe to be dealt with in similar fashion. His alleged conduct and now proven conduct is infinitely more serious than their failures. And yet, Judge Hlophe remains to poison the bench in the Western Cape. To be a judge in that division must be agony. I've done that job. I know how hard it is. I know how you desperately need the moral and personal support and fellowship of your colleagues. To work in the Cape Court at the moment must be purgatory.
Judge Kriegler, Karen, in a very good analysis a few weeks ago, made the comment or the remark that Judge Hlophe appears to be untouchable. She lists a long list of instances, and we refer to some of them again tonight, from 2004. where he should have or could have been reported to the Judicial Service Commission, but nothing has happened. And the times when he was reported, we saw, you know, processes stalling and being dragged over for years. Why do you think he is, or at least seems to be, untouchable? What is it about him that makes him untouchable and that makes the JSC scared of acting against him?
Adrian, if this is purely my own inference that I've drawn from the beginning, Judge Hlophe was tipped at one stage to be Zuma's nominee and therefore appointee as Chief Justice. He represents a significant power grouping within the split ANC. He's an RET man. He has been from the beginning. He has a following, not only Barnabas Kulu, but a number of other significant lawyers have been active proponents of Judge Hlophe's advancement. You will recall that he even took money under the counter from Oasis for years, nearly R500,000. That was swept under the counter because the man was too big. He was too important to deal with. It was similarly in this instance. People have been defending John Hlophe because of his political connections. The mandate that he had, the ministers that he mentioned to Justice Nkabinda. That's why he has been dealt with like he has. And that is why I have serious doubts that if the matter goes to Parliament, as it should, he will be dealt with the firmness that he should be dealt with.
Before we continue our discussion with Judge Johann Kriegler, just a few comments from our readers. Tony Beamish says, Johann Kriegler is undoubtedly the brightest legal mind in South Africa, past, there, and for many more generations to come. That is a nice compliment, Judge. Brett Dunbar says, thank you, Judge, for the courage. How inspiring. And Tony Beamish again, I forgot John Hlophe did not pay tax on his Oasis income. Judge Kriegler, what to do? What do we do with the JSC? Why? We've heard from Karen in her opening remarks about the almost depressing experience she had this week, seeing not the best judges being promoted, while some brilliant jurists did not make it onto the list of short list for the Constitutional Court bench and the Supreme Court of Appeal. What is wrong with the JSC and how do we fix this?
Adrian, there's nothing wrong with the system, with the mechanism of the JSC. It's a little elaborate, it's a little overprotective of judges, but that's not the problem. The problem is the people at the controls of that mechanism. It has not been pushed with the requisite political will, with the requisite sense of urgency that dealing with judges promptly serves to defend the judiciary, not to damage it. That the way that you maintain the integrity and the public standing of the judiciary is to show to the world unashamedly and unafraidly, if a judge stumbles, we will deal with him promptly and appropriately.
Judge Kriegler, while we have you, I'm going to take advantage of this and ask you, I'm sure you have followed the JSC hearings this week. There was an issue that served before the JSC on Judge Daya Pillay and Minister Pravin Gordhan going to a meeting of the Chief Justice Mogoeng. Have you heard, did you hear this remarks by the Chief Justice, the response by Judge Pillay, and if I may ask you to share your views and thoughts on this matter?
I heard it at the time live. I have played it since. I can only say it's a pity that seems to have been an innocent, proper meeting years ago, has through lack of proper recollection, human frailty in memory, has been put in the wrong light. I'm sure that the Chief Justice and Minister Gordhan will agree with me that there's no significant difference between what the two of them recall. It's just a pity that it came out in the way it did, and now that politicians have grabbed it and run with it. And actually, I also listened to the public speech outside the police station this morning of a politician trying to make a mountain out of something that wasn't even a molehill.
So you would disagree with the view, Judge Kriegler, that what Praveen Gordon did by asking the CJ Mogoeng, how did my friend fare, or how did she do, to equate that with what Judge Hlophe did when he went to have tea with Besan Kabinde and Chris Jafta?
Well, come now. It's chalk and cheese. The two of them have got absolutely nothing in common with one another. Perhaps Gordon was unwise. I don't think so. But at the very worst, it was unwise. At the very best, for Judge John Hlophe, he was guilty of perverting the cause of justice. He should not only have been impeached, he should have been prosecuted and put in prison for trying to defeat the ends of justice.
Judge Kriegler, my last question to you: what is Fool's view of what to do next? I mean, what powers do you have? What would you litigate again against the JSC if they don't act?
We have no power other than that as a citizen to go to court to try to enforce the constitutional rules that apply to all of us. We are seriously considering what to do about the non-suspension of Judge Hlophe, certainly. We are also contemplating other possible steps vis-a-vis the Judicial Service Commission that I am not at liberty at this stage to disclose. But we're not sitting on our hands.
I knew there was something you didn't want to tell us. Thank you so much, Judge Kriegler. Karen, can I just bring you in while the judge is here? Just explain the suspension issue, because I'm slightly confused about it. Can the president only suspend Judge President Hlophe on the recommendation of the JSC?
Yes.
Yeah, that's in the Constitution. I think it's section 177, and just Judge Kriegler will correct me if I'm wrong, but it explicitly states that it is only upon a recommendation of the JSC that the president can suspend. There is obviously the JSC Act, which also, you know, has conditions around suspension, but fundamentally the president cannot simply suspend a judge, and that's arguably an attempt to protect the judiciary from arbitrary political decisions. But in the case where the JSC is dysfunctional and unwilling to actually meet and engage with what is a very damning indictment of a judge and needs to be dealt with, obviously that becomes problematic.
This is why I was saying that the issue of suspension is premature right now. As long as this decision sits with the JSC, then we can't really be talking.
They can't do anything until such time as the JSC says we agree with the tribunal report that this is in fact gross misconduct and refers it to the National Assembly. Suspension is not on the table. So, you know, there has been this culture. I mean, in the case, the Poswa matter, the JSC, the tribunal report was delivered and it took 2 years before the JSC actually made a decision on what they were going to do. So, you know, there is no urgency and there's no sense in which they feel a particular drive to deal with issues. There was one instance in which a matter was dealt with very quickly, and that was obviously with the Mabel Jansen racism on Facebook issue. But she actually resigned, you know, prior to that process unfolding. And that was done within, I think, a matter of weeks or like mostly months, but it was very, very fast.
I don't know about you, the viewers, but I am certainly going to open a bottle of wine now and have a wonderful glass to reflect on the troubles in our judiciary. Thank you so much, Judge Johann Kriegler, Jeanette Shabalala, and Karen Moorn joining me tonight around the editor's table. This is News 24 Editor's Table. We will be back next week. Come and sit around the table with us again. Thank you for joining, and goodbye.